Give this a thought. Why is it that many Western nations have a beautiful glossy image, but on the other hand, India's image is generally centered around some negative media stereotypes? Well, many Western nations enjoy a massive soft power advantage over other countries, and it helps them in constructing and maintaining their well-crafted glossy image. But beneath that shiny surface lies an ugly reality, and keeping it hidden may deny the global community an opportunity to learn from the mistakes and the failed experiments of the Western nations. Not only that, it may also stop the West from completely benefiting from possible solutions to their problems that the global community or nations like India can offer.
For instance, how many of us know that due to hunger, children in the UK are forced to eat toilet paper and scavenge trash bins at night for food? The situation is not very different from the United States, where it was revealed that 41 million people were struggling with hunger, out of which 13 million were children. At times, we Europeans wonder who will finally highlight our painful stories on the global forums. Is there somebody who will be able to cut through the glossy image that has been built by our soft power and highlight the well-established pattern of sexual abuse against our women and children? Millions of women and children in Europe and America need to be heard too. Their tears are also important. For instance, how many of us have heard of the New Wolf Pack Gang in Spain, Tournante in France, and Operation Hydrant in the UK? And how many of us are aware of the British pro-pedophile activist group, PI, which advocated for the legal acceptance of pedophilia? It may even be said that the systematic brainwashing by the Western media has gone to an extent that a vast majority of the British population is not properly familiar with the actual situation. Many Britons are not only unable to fully understand the complex layers of a nation like India, but are also unaware of what is happening in their own country. This situation was clearly evident in the results of the poll, which revealed that the vast majority of the British population has no idea how many women are raped every year in the UK, with 96% of those polled saying they either didn't know the true extent of rape or that they thought it was far lower than the true figure. Such is the level of brainwashing of the general British public that 34% of British people would prefer Britain to still have an empire. How shocking is that? Well, do they even know that the British Empire was responsible for millions of deaths, for many atrocities, and for the looting of $45 trillion from India during the period 1765 to 1938? We have all read numerous media articles praising the so-called Scandinavian model when it comes to the environment. But when a major WWF study criticized Sweden for its unsustainable consumption of the planet's resources, did that news reach to you too? The study revealed that if everyone lived the lifestyles that Swedes do, we would require 4.2 Earths. Are you also familiar with the number of developed nations that are dumping their e-waste and outsourcing their pollution to other nations? As far as the metric of consumption-based emissions is concerned, take a look at this to familiarize yourself with the countries which top this chart. And no, it is not only their individual ecological footprint and consumption-based emissions which are extremely high. It is also worth keeping in mind that 80% of our planet's cumulative emissions come from Europe and the USA alone. India's global image was recklessly restricted to caste and cow for a long time, until some global media outlets in 2012 decided to add one more stereotype to that list, and that was rape. Indian men were ridiculed, shamed, and stereotyped to such an extreme extent by the Western media that even an English author, Christopher John Penrose Booker, went on to say, "If there is a cultural problem here, it is the long-standing desire of the Western media to stereotype Indian males as sexual predators." Without any element of doubt, stereotyping Indian males as sexual predators had a severe multidimensional negative impact on India. But Christopher Booker was not the only one who felt that the media's attitude towards India was unusual. According to the Soft Power 30 report, media coverage of India is often unhelpful and unflattering. Issues like pollution and gender equality consume much of the media oxygen on India.
The Soft Power 30 report reveals the nations with the highest soft power in the world. There should not be a surprise that the former colonial powers, Britain and France, hold the top positions.
As one may expect, the list is dominated by Western nations. Despite its widespread hunger, poverty, sexual crimes against women and children, highly polluted nitrogen dioxide-filled air, prevalent racism, as well as its historical wrongdoings and many other shortcomings, the UK is generally perceived very well across the world, and in many ways, it does manage to project itself as a role model for the world, thanks to its considerable soft power. It's worth noting that the Soft Power 30 report mentions that the British media house, BBC, is a valuable soft power asset for the UK. The glossy image of these Western nations is sometimes so bright that it is almost impossible to notice the ugly reality that lies underneath. Did you know that some international tourists who visit Paris for the first time need to be treated and counseled if they suffer from Paris syndrome? Paris syndrome is a disturbing psychological condition which is experienced by some tourists and visitors who go to Paris but face extreme shock and trauma at finding out that Paris is far too different from their expectations. Psychiatric symptoms such as hallucinations, acute delusional states, feeling of being a victim of prejudice, anxiety, vomiting, dizziness, etc. are commonly observed in the victims. Surprised because you heard it for the first time? Well, you shouldn't be.
France ranks first in the 2019 Soft Power 30 Index.
So, what constitutes a nation's soft power? According to the Soft Power 30 report, the objective data consists of 6 components. In addition, the following factors were covered in the polling. Nobody should be surprised that India is absent from the list of 30 nations which have the greatest soft power in the world. The report mentioned that the country makes remarkably poor use of it, as it does not yet benefit as much from international awareness, positive associations, or investments in cultural diplomacy as many other countries, making it an underperformer. Even among the Asian nations, India sits low at 8th, below nations like Thailand, Taiwan, and Malaysia. Though the index may have some limitations, to an extent, it manages to reflect the overall global situation. India must continue to invest in its core sectors like education, infrastructure, and science. It should also continue its fight against corruption. But as a developing nation, and with a lower per capita budget, India can't be expected to match the developed nations in all parameters right away. On the other hand, if the digital soft power assets of the former colonial powers promote negative publicity of a formerly colonized nation like India, which is trying hard to rebuild itself, its journey to prosperity will only get tougher. Due to negative publicity, India loses opportunities in trade and tourism and in many other components, resulting in the weakening of its other soft power components and sub-indices. In addition, the way India and Indians are perceived globally is directly related to their own safety overseas. The digital sub-index of the Soft Power 30 Index indicates that India's digital presence is nowhere near the powerful digital global penetration of the Western nations. Yes, the media is extremely important because the digital sub-index can positively or negatively influence other sub-indices by encouraging or discouraging one's interest in exploring options in areas such as the culture, tourism, business, and education of a nation.
In addition, continuous bashing by the global media is also likely to seriously impact the overall morale of a nation. Can we expect people with low self-esteem and low self-confidence to be at their creative best? If people are not at their creative best, will they be able to find the best solutions to their problems? Vulnerable and depressed minds are more likely to blindly copy and imitate and less likely to create and innovate. So is India vulnerable? And is it an easy target for foreign soft power assets?
It must be easier to manipulate a society in which a large population suffers from post-colonial identity crisis, resulting in a lot of self-doubt and low self-esteem. The foreign influencers and exploiters appear to understand very well that people who suffer from low self-esteem and low confidence are more likely to adopt foreign cultures, ideologies, and lifestyles and give up their own identity and heritage. This situation opens multiple ways to exploit and conquer such vulnerable societies through religion or commerce. For many greed-driven foreign institutions, India is just a big market. Capturing global markets through cultural domination appears to be an old and time-tested strategy in which the oppressed nations are likely to become socio-culturally, economically, and emotionally colonized. But the question that arises is, why is India's soft power weak when the country appears to be so rich in resources? Resources are not enough, as it is even more important how a nation utilizes them. For example, India may have a big film industry, but if its own film industry creates negative stereotypes, then India will not be able to fully utilize the soft power component. Foreign investments in a country's delicate soft power assets can also have a great influence. A massive film industry is great, but it is also important to know if that film industry is not being financed or controlled by foreign investors. Not only do the Western nations know how to make the most of their own soft power, but they also possess the art of exploiting or utilizing the soft power of other nations. Yoga can be a good example. Across the world, many are practicing yoga without necessarily knowing its dharmic and Indian roots. Perhaps yoga was never supposed to act as a soft power originally, as in dharmic understanding, it is more about empowering oneself to unite with the divine. But yoga increasingly started to be seen as a type of soft power when Americans Americanized it. America has the biggest chunk of the global yoga industry. Registration of a yoga school with a renowned USA-based organization adds value to a yoga school, regardless of the part of the world where it is located. Yoga was supposed to be an important element in the culture sub-index of India. But is yoga, as a soft power, serving American interest more than India's? India's dharmic traditional systems do not believe in the doctrine of global conquest. Their goal is not to eventually replace other faiths. Therefore, they will never have the same global ambitions as some other religions do. So, when it comes to cultural influence through religion, India will always remain in a disadvantageous position comparatively. India should speed up in the process of improving its fundamentals, from education infrastructure and civic infrastructure to the overall business-friendly environment. It is gradually getting better, but probably not fast enough. It is a pity that a country which represents nearly 1/6 of entire mankind has fewer embassies than some nations which have very small populations. An improvement can be demanded there as well. As far as the attitude of the global media is concerned, a constructive, good-hearted criticism should always be welcome, but India should fight the agenda-driven negative publicity that attempts to tarnish its reputation or vilify its people. Jonathan McClory of Soft Power 30 Report said, "Global media is rarely helpful when it comes to presentation of India, and a lot of that comes down to some of the big issues that they like to just hammer away on, so there is an image problem and there is a need for India to tell its side of the story more effectively." Yes, India should pay attention to these global think tanks, but eventually India also needs to realize that the Soft Power 30 Index is not an Indian creation. Most of the metrics through which we measure various parameters globally
and the metrics on which the Soft Power 30 Index bases its calculations are not Indian creations either. In a way, we are still gauging things with the help of tools, thoughts, and perspectives which are not Indian. Indians also need to discover their own metrics and tools through which they will understand and study global affairs. That's when the world will truly know the Indian perspective. India needs its own versions of HSBC and Citibank, its own version of S&P and Moody's, its own versions of KPMG and PwC, its own international social media platforms, its own version of BBC and CNN, its own version of the Oscar and the Nobel, its own highly reputed scientific journals and academic institutions, its own global think tanks which can influence the investor sentiment and international policy making, and its own international human rights bodies. And of course, it will eventually need a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. Until that happens, India will not be able to cement its rightful place on the global stage and will not be able to fully utilize its soft power to positively impact global affairs. Give it a thought. Is it too much of a demand that Indians are only asking to be treated with mutual respect by the nations which are developed or are former colonial powers?
Even if you believe that Indians are materially poorer than you, mocking anyone on the basis of their wealth cannot be regarded as civilized behavior. Believe me, Indians can't wait to experience prosperity too, and after gaining independence, they have worked hard to reclaim their lost glory. Yes, they make mistakes and they learn from them. What's wrong in that? India is big, India is diverse, and understanding India can be complex even for Indians, let alone the rest of the world. Today, India is rebuilding, but in this process, it has its share of vulnerabilities. Unconsciously, many Indians continue to suffer from a post-colonial identity crisis, and they need to be empowered. Many of them are just innocently ill-informed about the Western world. Confidence has fallen so low that for many of them, the West is the shining pillar of all virtues. In India, many Western ideas and practices are blindly imported without any critical examination. India does not have enough dedicated think tanks which can deeply analyze global affairs and help Indians to learn the best global practices and also help them in rejecting the failed foreign experiments. But with my limited resources, I am doing my bit. If taken in the right spirit, globalization can be good, but globalization does not mean westernization or Americanization. The people of India have suffered both economically and culturally through multiple invasions and colonization. At this vulnerable stage, don't you think that they also deserve some social and cultural independence? Perhaps they also need some personal time so that they can repair what was damaged and can regain their lost identities. Don't you think that they also deserve the right to oppose cultural genocide by foreign monocultures which have homogenized and diluted so many beautiful Indian cultures and are still active in so many ways? Don't you think that India also needs an environment in which foreigners don't come to tell them that they are praying to false gods and that their gods are demons? Let us not forget that India is an integral part of our beautiful world. With that perspective, should we not consider India's golden heritage as a valuable global asset? Shouldn't we all come forward to do what we can to preserve it in its true form? Well, it is not just about India's story. In fact, there are many nations in Africa, Asia, and in other parts of the world which must have much to offer to the world in terms of their traditional wisdom and revolutionary futuristic ideas. But their voices are not easily heard because of the dominance of a few nations in the most powerful international forums. In a globalized world, are we giving equal treatment and equal opportunity to each and every nation and allowing their people to positively influence our planet? How can such global forums claim to promote equality and pluralism when they themselves are not giving equal opportunities to all nations to participate in them? Reforms are required, not only in many nations, but also in various global forums. Without equal participation of all nations and people, we as a global society will never reach our true potential. Without any intention of shaming or stereotyping any country, community or people, and for the sake of our future generations, we should come together to learn best practices from one another. In that regard, there is a lot that India can learn from the West, and I have worked in that dimension too. A nation's soft power plays a key role in the way it is perceived abroad, and that is why it should be quite reasonable to say that the world may never be able to discover the real India or fully benefit from the thoughts, perspective and solutions that Indians are able to bring to our global problems, unless India starts to rank close to the Western nations in terms of soft power.
And yes, we need India to re-emerge, because at some stage the global community will need to understand that the wealth that is generated by colonization or exploitation of other countries and the economy that is built upon greed-driven consumerism cannot guarantee long-term prosperity.
Years of hard work, hundreds of sleepless nights, plus a lot of passion, money, and good intentions have gone into the making of this episode. If my thoughts resonate with you, please share my work with others and help it to reach the global policymakers and our planet's well-wishers. Namaste, my name is Karolina Goswami. I was not born in India, but through my data-driven work, I have tried my best to improve India's global image. Our YouTube channel, India in Details, is also an emerging digital asset of India's soft power, and you can participate in this mission through your financial contribution. It is also very important that you watch the episodes that are mentioned in this list. This should help you in broadening your perspective. Connect with us on our other social media platforms and on our other YouTube channel. The links to contribute financially are displayed on your screen right now. See you again.